All right. Good
Should I go
afternoon. I'm
ahead?
Shannon Doe. I'm with University of Maryland Extension. Thank you for being here today. This is the Women in Ag webinars. We'd like to thank our collaborators for the program, as well as the sponsors for our program. Today, we have Dr. Sarah Hirsch. She's the Ag Agent in Somerset County, and she's going to be talking about a very timely topic, at least where we are here in the Mid-Atlantic, decision-making resources and tools for cover cropping and other best management practices. So Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Shannon. Welcome, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started here. So before I move on from the title slide, I'll just say that's triticale. Here's the grass and forage radish and crimson clover is the cover crop that you're seeing there in the fall, probably about a month or so after it was planted. And really the kind of the idea or the rationale behind giving this talk is that cover crops can be really complicated and there's a lot of choices that you have to make. And especially if you're just starting out in farming, but even really experienced farmers, they still have a lot of choices and it can be hard to know what cover crop to plant. And so you have all of these different considerations. You may be wondering, what species should I plant? Or should I plant a monoculture or a mixed species? And then when am I going to plant them? That could be when do you want to plant them, or when are you kind of forced into planting them based on your cash crop cycle? And then what seeding rate should I plant? And if you have a mix, that gets even more complicated. So you don't want one species to outcompete the others, or maybe depending on your goal for that cover crop or what you want that cover crop to do, you may want one species to dominate. So you may want a legume species to dominate and then just a little bit of grass in there. So you have to think about all these things. And then you have your planting method. So will you be drilling that seed into the ground? Are you broadcasting it, aerial seeding it with an airplane or a high boy interseeder? And then when on the other end of the cover crop, when will you be terminating it? And then what method will you be using to terminate it? So those are just some of the issues involved in planning a cover crop. And this talk is going to give you some different scenarios and basically walk you through a few scenarios or choices that you would have to make using some different tools that are available online or resources. So a lot of what I'm talking about will be interactive tools, but then there's also some resources like books or other resources that I'm going to be mentioning that can be helpful in making some of these decisions. So I believe I have 5 scenarios, and we'll start here with scenario number 1. And so we're going to pretend that we just inherited a farm in Maryland with a hard pan. And how can I remediate this with cover crops? So I really like to think about the goal with cover crops up front. And so why are you planting that cover crop? That's really going to give you the most benefit. You're already investing in the cover crop. You're paying for the seed. You're paying for your time to get it out there. And so let's get the most out of it and think about what's our goal and how can we design and implement that cover crop to achieve the goal. So our goal here is that there's a hard pan. And so we want to think about what species and management can we use to address that goal. So I'm going to use, so the first tool to address that scenario that we're going to be going over is called the Northeast Cover Crop Council Decision Tool. And so I'm going to just, on all of these tools, I'm just going to start from Google. And here, if you type in Northeast Cover Crop Council, then this is the first link to come up, and you go ahead and click on that. And if you go to the main council page, then the decision tool is right here on the home page. So you want to go ahead and go to that decision tool. And then this screen is going to come up. And if you kind of scroll down on that page, if anybody's following along, you're going to first come to the Cover Crop Explorer, and then you're going to come to the Species Selector tool. And we're actually going to be walking through both of these. They're two different parts of what the Northeast Cover Crop Council has put together. So we're going to be going through both of these options, but we're going to go ahead and start with the species selector tool. So if you go ahead and click on that, try the species selector tool, then you're going to come to a screen that looks like this. And you just go ahead and click next. And then you're going to have to enter in your field location. So these are all, by entering in the field location, it allows the tool to narrow in on what planting dates are going to be ideal for what cover crop species. So I went ahead and entered the address here, and then you have to know your plant hardiness zone. And a little side note, I threw this in here. So if you're not sure what your plant hardiness zone is, and you are within the United States, you can go ahead and type in plant hardiness map USDA, and this USDA plant hardiness zone map will come up. Oops, let's see. Here we go. And you can zoom into your location and figure out what plant hardiness zone that you're in. And so for Princess Anne, Maryland, I figured out what zone I was in, 7B, and then I can go ahead back to my tool in that previous screen. Let me go back here. Okay, so go ahead and enter zone 7 in there. And then you click next, and it's going to take you to this site. So here you can see it zoomed in on the location, and it self-populates with the soil conditions based on the soil maps for that location. Now you can change it. So perhaps the soil map tells you that you are poorly drained, but in fact, you know that you've added drainage tile and you are now well drained. So you can go ahead and change that if you need to. Same with the flooding frequency. It'll auto-populate, but you can change it. So after you take care of that, you go on to the next. It'll tell you your average precipitation, the frost dates, how many days you're frost-free, and the next. So here we get to the goals. So this tool also upfront wants to know what is your goal, and it's going to help determine what cover crop would be ideal based on that goal. And so here we have to penetrate the plow pan, because remember, we inherited that farm that has the plow pan, and we're trying to alleviate that with the cover crop. Okay, so when you hit next, you put that goal, and you can do multiple goals, but you can do up to 3. I just went ahead and did the 1 for the demonstration today, but you can see these are the species. The more filled that this bar is here, the better it is at achieving that goal. So the better it is at alleviating the hard pan. So you can see that the top choices here would be alfalfa and radish and sunflower, rye is pretty good. I kind of prefer the calendar view. So if you look over here on the left, you can click on this calendar view button, and then you're going to see the same species, but you're going to see it with this calendar view. And I prefer that because then you can actually, you go ahead and enter in your previous cash crop and the planting to harvest dates of that cash crop. So I did corn from April. The corn will be in the field planted on April 10th and harvested on September 30th. And then on that calendar view, it fills in that time where corn is in the field with that pink highlighter. So now you can see that although alfalfa would be good at alleviating the hard pan, in the fall, you're not going to really be able to get it planted in time. And so that may not be your best option. Same with the forage radish. That was one of the best ones for alleviating the hard pan. However, if we're not harvesting our corn till the end of September, we really missed that planting window for that radish cover crop. So we may want to do a cereal rye here. If you can't change your cash crop, then you may want to shift and change your cover crop. It's not quite as good as at alleviating compaction, but it does fit within the window that you have. So it is still within the optimal planting time here, and then you'll get some good growth in the fall, and you'll actually get some benefit out of that cover crop. It wouldn't really, you really don't want to plant a cover crop well outside of the optimal planting window because it's just not going to be successful. Okay, if you want to learn more about species, so I mentioned on that Northeast Cover Crop Council webpage, there was that other tool called the Cover Crop Explorer. So here it lists a lot of species. Maybe you're familiar with them, really experienced with them, and you know all about them and you don't really want to learn more about it. But if you do want to learn more about it, this Cover Crop Explorer is a really nice tool for that. And you can go ahead and just click on the Try the Cover Crop Explorer tool, and then it'll list all of the different cover crops. So let's say that we're thinking about doing radish and we want to view the crop details about radish. So I'll just show you what that would look like. First, it pulls up a descriptive narrative about it. It has some photos, what it's going to look like in the fall, if it overwinters, what it would look like in the spring. Then it tells you what the radish is good at. So we know that we saw before that it's very good at penetrating the plow pan and alleviating compaction. It's pretty good at nitrogen scavenging. If you're looking for a cover crop to have lasting residue, maybe you want a cover crop to have a nice thick mulch for your following cash crop to help control weeds. Radish is not going to be the choice for you. So that radish tissue does melt away pretty quickly. So this goal kind of synopsis here is helpful in knowing what it will do and what it won't do. It tells you about, in terms of weeds, how it will compete with weeds at different times. It tells you the environmental tolerances. This can be pretty good. So you know if you have a field with high salinity or a flooded field, the radish is not going to do that great. There may be other species that do better. If you want to know what other species would do better in salinity, you can select that in the other cover crop tool, in the decision tool, and kind of sort that way. So basically, this whole program is a good way to kind of sort through all the species and to know what does what. If you continue, so this is still just scrolling down on all of that, on the Species Explorer, all that information about the forage radish. So the next thing as you scroll down is going to tell you about the growth traits, how easy it is to establish, the soil drainage, gives you some recommendations for planting, kind of a comparable price per seed for planting, the drill depth, whether they recommend it be aerial seeded, frost seeded, and then other information about that radish termination. So different ways that they recommend that you terminate it. And then finally, the planting and growth windows. It's going to tell you when is the ideal time to have a reliable establishment. And remember, all of this is populated for that plant hardiness zone that you entered in. So you want to make sure that that is accurate. And you can do that again on the USDA website. Just any more comments, and then the resources and references. So if you want to learn even more about radish, then here's a whole list of other different fact sheets or publications about that forage radish. Okay, moving on to scenario 2, and we will also move on to a new tool with scenario 2. And so now we had 4 inches of rain, and our corn harvest got pushed back to October 20th. So we had intended on planting earlier, and we had a cover crop. We all planned out we were going to do rye, but now we can't plant till October 28th. And we want to know, in our location, is that rye going to do okay being planted October 28th? So if you go ahead back to Google, you can enter in Climate Smart Farming Tools. And this tool is actually through Cornell University, and it comes up here, Climate Smart Farming Tools. Go ahead and click that, and you'll have these different tools here. So the one that we're going to walk through today is this CSF winter cover crop planting scheduler. So we went ahead and clicked on that. This is a pretty straightforward tool. Again, we want to enter in our location. So I entered in that same location in Maryland, and then we want to enter in our cover crop. One limitation of this tool is that it's pretty limited with the cover crops that you can choose. So it had rye. I went ahead and entered rye. And then we know that our planting date, remember that got pushed back to October 28th. And so you can just kind of run your mouse over this black line. The black line here is the recent 15-year average. And you can see that on October 28th, you have 87% chance that that cover crop will still be successfully established. And so it just gives you some information telling you that, yeah, probably we can still plant it at this point. And you can really see when, if you just run your mouse down that line, I'm not doing this in real time, so you can't see it on my screen, but if you are, you can just run your mouse down, and this number is going to drastically drop as you get later. And so you can see until what point you can reliably plant that rye at this location, based on the last 15-year average. Okay, so that is a little tool there. The next scenario is going to be dealing with weeds. So this farmer is primarily planting cover crops to control weeds in the field. And how can they address their weed concerns while doing their best to conserve soil health? And so this is not as much a tool, but a really helpful website and resource that you can go to. So if you enter into Google integrated weed management, and you can see it's this link right here, what is integrated weed management, grow IWM. Click on that. So just gives you a little bit of background. What we're doing here is an approach to managing weeds using multiple control tactics. One of those is going to be through cover crops. If you go up at the top and you click on that weed management toolbox heading, then it's going to bring this page up. And then if you scroll down on that page, weed management toolbox, you'll come to all of these different buttons here. So these are going to, each one of these buttons is going to take you to information about those different weed management control tactics. So because we're talking about cover crops, we'll go ahead and click on the cover crop button. And then it takes you to another page, cover crops as a weed management tool. So it's not a tool, but this is going to provide some really good information on controlling weeds with cover crops. And you may have some of these questions. You can read more about them. And then there's also a link to download 2 different publications, fact sheet type publications about cover crops as a weed management tool and cover crops for weed suppression. So I just wanted to introduce everyone to these resources. If your primary goal is controlling weeds, then go ahead and check that out. Okay, moving on to scenario 4. So now this grower is growing a second year of corn in their field. And what would be a good cover crop to help maintain their soil health and help provide nitrogen to the next corn crop? So this is kind of my tool of choice. I'm showing a few different tools here, and there's other ones out there too, because everyone has different preferences and different learning styles and ways that they like to view and gather information. I find this tool really helpful, but maybe others find some of the other tools more helpful. This one is a bit harder to find. If you Google Virginia Cover Crop College 101, that would probably be the best way for this resource to come up. And then you go ahead and click on this Cover Crop College Tools and Calculators. it's going to take you to this Virginia Tech corn and small grain management webpage. And then I want you to scroll down the page a bit and click on, under the cover crop college tools and calculators, click on this link right here, cover crop planting calendar and mix calculator. And this just takes you to an Excel sheet that you can download. So it doesn't have the pictures that the Northeast Cover Crop Council does. A lot of the information is the same between the Northeast Cover Crop Council and this Excel calculator. I think it just kind of depends on how you like to view your information. So if you go ahead and download that Excel sheet and open it up, the tabs across the bottom are going to be the different calculator worksheets. So the first one here is a fall seeded cover crop date, and it's really straightforward. So this model is based on the idea of first choosing your seasonal niche of the cover crop, then narrowing it down to what functional groups you want for that cover crop, and then finally narrowing it down to what species. And that's how this information is kind of gathered here. And so if you have, so let me start by saying first you want to enter your first freeze date in this pink box. So you want to change that based on your area, and you can find that information online, different websites depending on where you live. But so I went ahead and entered here the 1st of November. And so then you want to pick your seasonal niche. And if you're planting a cover crop in August to early September, then you would be in this niche 3 and 4. In our case, we're planting the cover crop later than that. We're planting it after a corn crop in the fall. So we're going to be in niche 1 and 2 here. So as long as we get that cover crop in by early November, we still fall within this niche 1 and 2, actually even early December for one of the species. So you can see these blue bars across, that would be the range of planting dates that you could plant that cover crop species. So we choose our seasonal niche, and then we want to go ahead and choose our functional groups. So in the scenario I gave, we're doing corn followed by corn for our cash crops. And that's always where you want to start. You want to think about what is the next cash crop and what are the goals for the cover crop. So how is that cover crop going to benefit the next cash crop, or going to benefit the field, or help with any issues you're having in the field? And so your decision about what functional groups to choose, such as whether you want to choose a grass or a brassica or a legume or a mix of all three, is going to depend on the previous crop, the following crop, and the goal that you have for that cover crop in the field, what you're trying to get out of the cover crop. And I like this tool because they group it. You can see it all on one page, and they group it with the different functional groups. So it's just easy to kind of see all the information and process it. And then finally, we want to go to the species. So here you can see all of the species listed. If you want more information about these species, if you're not familiar or experienced growing them, you can get more information by going back. This is back to the main website, and right underneath that tool, there's a resource, Virginia NRCS Cover Crop Planning Manual, and that will tell you all about the different species. You can also learn about the species with that Cover Crop Explorer option in the Northeast Cover Crop Council tool. But this one isn't going to include the pretty photos, but it has a lot of good information about the different species. So for example, I enlarged the description of triticale here. So triticale is a cross between rye and wheat. It has characteristics in between the two. Tells you, I mean, you can read through it, tells you different things about killing it, the feed quality. Some of the cover crop descriptions will tell you, like, this species mixes well with this other one, but not with this one. So a lot of good practical information in these descriptions. So here we see, here's another example in the forage radish, it tells you that it's good in mixes, but be careful, it will outcompete companions. So just some good practical information there. So now we want to go back. So we learned a bit more about the species, and there's always going to be the question of monoculture cover crop versus a mixed species cover crop. So a lot of times it's good to think about mixes as your default. Like, why would you not do a mix? If you have a good reason to not do a mix, which you may, then that's fine. But in general, mixes can provide more benefits than just a monoculture. And so the mix that we chose here ahead of corn would be triticale, forage radish, and a crimson clover. So the mix is going to offer you multiple functional groups and be able to address multiple purposes. So in this case, the radish is going to be biodrilling and scavenging that nitrogen. The clover is going to be adding nitrogen through fixation to the system. And so that's going to be really important, both the scavenging of nitrogen and the added nitrogen from the atmosphere is going to be important since you are doing corn after corn. So there's 2 years of corn, which is a heavy nitrogen feeder. And then the triticale is going to be adding organic matter, and that residue is going to stick around longer than the clover or the radish residue. So that may be a reason to put in some triticale in a mix. I wouldn't recommend doing a straight triticale because then you're not adding in as much of that nitrogen. It will scavenge some nitrogen, but it's not going to be fixing nitrogen. And that will be important since it's corn following corn. So if you do decide to do a mix, then there's one other tool that I find very helpful that I want to show you. It's called the Cover Crop Planting Calendar and Mix Calculator. And this is the same Excel spreadsheet that we just looked at, but it's going to be a different tab on the bottom. So remember on the bottom here, if we scroll over here, we'll see that fall planting window spreadsheet. If you move over a few tabs, here you see the mix rate calculator spreadsheet. And so again, this is pretty straightforward. It's using the fraction of base rate technique. And so in our example, if our goal is a balanced mix of all functional groups, you want to cut back from a full rate of the grass because the grasses are going to be pretty competitive. And remember, all the grasses are going to be grouped together up here. These are in the same order as the other spreadsheet, which is nice. You're also going to want to cut back on the rate of the brassicas. They are also competitive. The legumes are going to be less competitive. And so they recommend staying pretty high on the legumes. So about 3/4 or 2/3 to a full rate of the legumes, but cutting back to 1/4 to a half rate of the grass and the brassica. And then you just enter that value into this pink column. The first thing that you want to do up at the top, right here in this black box where it says drill rate, you want to go ahead and change that. There's two options, drill or broadcast. So change that to the appropriate planting method based on what you plan to do. And then you just enter in here. So I'm going to do a half rate of triticale. I entered in 0.5, a 1/4 rate of the radish, because remember when I read more details about the radish, that one was really competitive and they said be careful in a mix that it can outcompete others. So I'm going to cut back to the 1/4 rate, and then I'm going to do 2/3 rate of the crimson clover just to keep costs down. I won't do the full rate. And then it will tell you, it'll just auto-populate and tell you how many pounds per acre then. So we're going to do 55 pounds of the triticale, 2 pounds of radish, and 10 pounds of the crimson clover per acre for drilled. If you had changed that drilled to broadcast, it's going to increase all the rates, assuming that not as much will germinate. Okay, another great resource if you're the type that likes books, and this is available for free online, or you can purchase a paper copy. This is a great resource about cover crops. So it has a lot of good charts telling you what cover crops are good at what different functions or goals. It'll tell you about other things here. So the duration, how lasting is the residue. So a lot of good charts, and they again break it up into the different functional groups, so the brassicas and the legumes and the non-legumes. Cultural traits. Detailed information about planting. And so if you're drilling, how many pounds per acre range, if you're broadcasting, so how deep do you plant it, potential advantages, like if you're looking for a cover crop to help with nematodes, it can tell you ones that potentially the mustards and the radishes can potentially help combat nematode issues, potential disadvantages. So some of them may be a potential for being a weed in the future. So it'll tell you that. And then the book is probably about 100 pages. It has in detail a lot of information about each crop in addition to all those tables. So here I pulled up crimson clover, and it just tells you all about it if you like to read actual text. The management, just pest management, reseeding, mixed seeding, killing, so all different things about that, and it'll go through every single species. So that's a really good book that is available online for free. The final tool that I'm going to go over is how much will my cover crop mix cost? So some of the other tools kind of gave you an idea or a comparison of if it would be very costly or not, but this tool actually is from a seed vendor called Green Cover, and it will actually has a calculator to tell you exactly how much your seed would cost if you bought it from them. But it would probably be comparable for other vendors as well, if you just want to get an idea of how pricey is a particular type of seed. So go ahead on the top and click on the Smart Mix, and you're going to come to this screen, and then you want to go ahead and start a mix. You will need, if you haven't used this before, it didn't do it on mine, but you will need to create an account. The account is free. They just ask for your email, and you can go ahead and get an account. So it recognized me here. And you enter in your zip code. It'll tell you your amount of rain. And then you have to enter in the details of your field. So I just put here trial 1 acres to plant 50, entered in my zip code. I want it in 50-pound bags, not in bulk. It is not organic because they do sell organic versus non-organic cover crop seed. I'm going to drill, and my next cash crop will be corn. And this is when I plan to plant and terminate my cover crop. And then down at the bottom, you have to enter in your priority or your goal. So I just went ahead and did nutrient cycling was my goal for that cover crop. You hit on the continue button, and now is where you get to this screen where you can add your species, and then it's going to calculate your cost over here. So we're going to go through that, and we're going to click add species. Now, one thing here is because I put in nutrient cycling as my goal, it did not pay attention over here on the left. So there's excellent, good, marginal, and risky. And so if you're on the excellent, it's only going to show you species that are excellent at cycling nitrogen. None of the grasses came up, but I'm going to go ahead and select the crimson clover and the radish. We're going to do the same mix that we did in the last scenario. We're just figuring out how much it would cost now. And the grasses didn't come up, but I can go ahead and go down to the good option here, and then I'm able to select triticale as my grass. And so then if you do continue, it has our 3 species here. Note this Smart Mix auto adjust at the top. It will automatically, if you want it to, recommend a certain planting rate. If you don't want to use the recommendations, because remember we used that NRCS calculator to determine our planting rate within our mix, so then we can just go ahead and turn that off, and manually enter in the planting rate that we want to use. So I just went ahead and manually entered in 15, 40, and 4 for the pounds per acre of the 3 different species. And then it will calculate the price for your 50-acre field. So in bags. So that will give you an idea of your price per acre. And here it has split down by species. So the clover is going to be 33 for 15 pounds of clover is going to be $33 per acre. The 40 pounds of triticale is going to be an extra 15, and then you're adding an extra 7 for the radish. So maybe you're like, oh, I really can't pay that much. I'm going to get rid of the crimson clover and just do triticale and radish. And because I'm getting rid of the clover, I'm going to increase my triticale rate. So you can play around with that and see how it comes out as far as the price. Okay, and then finally, I wanted to add just all of these tools are great, but in addition to these tools, it's really valuable just to learn from other farmers, and especially other farmers in your region who have tried out different cover crops. Because I've definitely found with some of these tools, it may say, oh, you can't plant Austrian winter pea after this date. But then you talk to this really experienced farmer who says, oh, I plant it this way every year, and it's pretty successful. It's not ideal, but I do get a nice stand if I plant it a month later and I drill it instead of broadcasting or whatever. They're kind of real-time on the ground recommendations and experiences that they have had. So wherever you are, if you have a local extension service, they probably have different events or workshops, field days. If you are in Maryland, we currently have a lot of cover crop field days that will be coming up. If you are interested in learning about them, please email me. They will be posted to our website for this bonus cover crop project that we're doing. So here's the URL for that website. They're not on there now, but they will be, or just email me and let me know that you're interested in attending cover crop field days. So we're going to be trying out a lot of innovative cover cropping practices on farms and then opening those farms up to host field days and encouraging a lot of farmer to farmer learning. There's also discussion groups that are currently happening in Maryland where they're getting farmers together and just learning from each other. That's a part of the Million Acre Challenge. If you're interested in that, you can email Lisa Garfield, and here's her email. But if you're not from Maryland, there may be opportunities wherever you are just to learn from other farmers in your region about what works and what doesn't work and to bounce questions off of each other. And that's what I have. Here's my contact information. I always appreciate it if folks can rate my teaching here by following this link here, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Sarah, we have an excellent question in the chat pod about weeds, current weeds that are, I guess, in a field or a garden bed. So what is the best method to remove the weeds and then plant the cover crops?
So I think maybe they can type back how big of a scale they're talking about, and then what type of weed that it would be, and also if they're willing to use herbicide or if they're not interested in herbicide. But if they don't type back, I think it kind of depend on that. So like tall weeds, that's really going to limit your herbicide options. You could mow them and till them under. Depending on what weed it is, I would try to cut them or mow them, and then you could tarp it if it's a small area and leave a tarp on for a while to kind of kill that weed. Some weeds will naturally die over the winter if you're in a cold region, and then that could help take care of it. But it is a great point that you do want to have, I mean, your cover crop is going to establish a lot better if you do put it in a relatively weed-free area. So you don't want to just throw a cover crop over a total weedy field because it's not going to be able to compete or do well with that. Okay, lambsbury, Canadian thistle. Oh no, using no herbicide. So Canadian thistle is a really tough one. I've heard if you're not using herbicide, I heard that goats will eat it. I don't know about that, but I really struggled at one of my research fields in Iowa controlling Canadian thistle, and we did use herbicide, but still it just took over. And that was in a prairie situation. So even the prairie plants weren't able to compete with the Canadian thistle. The lamb's quarter should be a bit easier to control. Yeah, I don't have anything too helpful because it is a really tough question. But you will want to try to get it under control before planting the cover crop, or the cover crop is not going to take very well.
Yeah, identification is a great first step, especially if it goes into dormant, but making sure those things aren't going to seed. Any other questions for Sarah? Right, I think you showed us some great information about cover crops and some planting tools. So thank you very much. At this point, I will stop recording.